This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, the rage of the Women's March. We are honored to have with us this evening Daniel Greenfield, a Shillman Fellow of the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the editor of the blog The Point at frontpagemag.com. And also we have Mark Tapson, also a Shillman Fellow of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and he is the editor of truthrevolt.org. Mark and Daniel, what an honor to have you on the Glazov Gang.
Honored to be here.
It's an honor being on the same show with Mark, and it's very wonderful speaking with you again.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, I don't even really know what to call it. Maybe I'll begin with the word spectacle. I think Ashley Judd really maybe wins some kind of a prize. I don't know what words we can use to describe what she was doing on that stage exactly. Mark, let me begin with you. What was going on at that Women's March exactly, and where's all this hatred and rage coming from?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the so-called Women's March is being touted as very successful because they had apparently quite a large turnout. But I think one thing that's important to keep in mind is that despite the numbers of the marchers, they're really vastly outnumbered by the majority of American women who don't want to call themselves feminists. Because most women want to distance themselves actually from what feminism has become, which is radicalized and bitter and very anti-men. And I think you can see a lot of that in this Women's March, which supposedly was about fighting for women's rights, just kind of an odd purpose considering that women already have full and equal rights in the West, and especially in America. I suppose they feel threatened by Donald Trump, a man they call a misogynist and rapist and all this, all these other kinds of accusations. They think, I guess they think he's going to take away their right to casually put their unborn children to death. But apart from that, women already have full and equal rights in this country, and most women in this country already know that and accept that, and they don't want to be associated with the kinds of feminists that you see in this march. Ashley Judd, for example, who put on really quite a lunatic performance, and Madonna is another one who said a lot of typical feminist rhetoric that just does not really reach the majority of women. And a lot of women voted for Donald Trump. Over 53%, I think, of women in this country voted for Trump. So what we're seeing in this march is really kind of the radical edge of feminism, and a lot of women who probably thought that Hillary was going to win the election, and so they bought their tickets to go be there for that. And when Hillary didn't win, they had to go anyway. Right. So they decided to make a march out of it, possibly. So,
thank you, Mark. So Daniel, what was your perspective on this, and were you very impressed with Ashley Judd and Madonna's speeches?
Between Ashley Judd and Madonna, this could very easily have been called the Million Mental Breakdown March. This was a ridiculous display. It was a political tantrum by the sole losers of an election, by people who claim to be oppressed yet have the disposable income to just get up on a whim and fly on over to Washington, D.C. It's by people who are angry because their views, their radicalism has been rejected by America one more time. It's because they know that they're out of step with ordinary Americans, and this makes them angry, this makes them furious, and they expose that fury, they exploit it. They use it to basically attack the values, the sensibilities of ordinary Americans. This is what the left has always done. This is what it's doing all over again.
Mark, why is it Trump? What is Trump triggered in these radicals?
He's really triggered a lot of their nihilistic rage, which is just under the surface of radical leftists.
What is it about him? What is it about him that triggers this?
I think it's a number of things, but mostly it's that Trump just refuses to play their game. He goes on the offensive, which the right is not accustomed to doing. The left is accustomed to keeping the right on the defensive all the time. Yeah. And in fact, conservatives we're so accustomed to apologizing and defending ourselves that when a fellow like Trump comes along and he's always on the offensive, the left doesn't really know how to respond to that. They're not accustomed to that at all, and so they can't control him in that respect.
And Mark, I think that's a perfect answer. He's definitely a culture warrior that people like Romney definitely aren't. I would just throw this on the table, gentlemen. I think that in terms of the war on masculinity in our society, I think he represents the alpha male, which the left and radical feminists just cannot stand. And I think that, I'm not so sure about who he is maybe personally, but he's surrounded by and in the milieu of what we could call people who support the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I think that angers a lot of them too. Daniel?
There's certainly a specific reaction to Donald Trump, to President Donald Trump, and I think Mark has covered that quite ably. But I think it's also important to remember that no matter who was sitting in the White House now, even if it was Kasich, they will have to be reacting in almost exactly the same way. And, the best evidence of that is President George W. Bush. The left lost its mind in exactly the same way. It poured out the same hateful fantasies, the same deranged reactions, even though Bush had run on compassionate conservatism. Any Republican sitting there would invite really the same reaction from the left, because the left is a profoundly intolerant movement. If you're not exactly on the same page with its agenda, then they're going to hate you, they're going to threaten to kill you. That's just what they do.
And gentlemen, the left always puts us in these difficult positions. Even some of the words that I have to use as a host, but there was a lot of these radical feminists out there. I just did a show with a symbol expert, Don Perlmutter, who analyzed this. That there's these radical feminists out there dressed as vaginas, and they've got all these posters and signs of quote unquote pussy, and get your hands off my P word, and we're the P and all this. I thought that feminism was against the objectification of women to begin with, but let me ask you, Mark, let me begin with you. Why is vulgarity so important to the left?
It's a very good question because, as you pointed out, they showed up in these so-called pussy hats and carrying signs that were far more profane than anything they've accused Donald Trump of saying. And I think part of it stems from just the standard leftist impulse to want to offend middle-class values. They want to offend. And so, they're quick to use profanity, even while they accuse Donald Trump of being profane. They're quick to use it themselves. So I think it's just the leftist impulse to offend, to attack the bourgeoisie, and so that's a large part of it.
Daniel, why the vulgarity? Why is it so important to them?
The left are cultural terrorists. They've always been cultural terrorists, which means that they set out for themselves the goal of destroying our values, of destroying our society, of undermining it, of attacking it, of confronting it, and of doing whatever they can to sabotage it. So this is the old leftist standard. This is their old approach. Attack our values, use vulgarity, undermine particularly the family. The left hates the family more than it does anything else because the family stands in the way of its total control over people. So it's going to use deliberate shock tactics. Now, of course, the left is allowed to do this. It's allowed to say anything it wants, to be considered cool and very hip and transgressive for doing it. But conservatives, or just, people in general who are not acting at a moment in a particularly leftist cause, are not allowed to say anything, to do anything. Everything they say has to be carefully monitored. At any point, the politically correct speech police might come for them, because there's one standard for the left. The left is allowed to do and say anything. And meanwhile, their political opponents, or just ordinary people, are not allowed to say or do anything whatsoever. And this March, the whole insane tantrum, as we judge Madonna, reminds us of that. The left is a privileged movement. It's an entitled movement. It's a movement of people who want to run our lives while at the same time obeying no laws whatsoever.
Absolutely. And, with Ashley Judd, you're just kind of sitting there, with your jaw, hanging open at certain parts. She's going on about her menstrual blood, soaking her sheets, and how much tampons are taxed instead of Viagra or something. I remember how forget how she connected these points logically exactly, but the key here is, menstrual blood and the tampons and da-da-da. But, I was thinking, if she's so concerned with blood and private parts of women, why didn't she devote 5 minutes to the victims of female genital mutilation under Islam and the hadiths like Bukhari that sanction this and mandate this for little girls, for millions of Muslim girls throughout the world under Islam? And I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but, Mark, let's start with you. Just comment on this hypocrisy. It's a really ugly hypocrisy.
Well, this comes up all the time, the question of why feminists don't protest against the cultures that really deserve the protest, the real misogynists, and that would be, the rape culture from the Middle East. And the basic reason is that multiculturalism trumps everything for the left. It trumps even feminism. And so the feminists, while they consider themselves oppressed, they consider other cultures to be even more oppressed. And so they're not going to turn around and criticize another oppressed culture. So that they'll stay silent about while they'll turn on the West and attack the supposedly white supremacist culture of Western civilization.
Really ugly stuff. I'd like to see them take this march to Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan and see how they do. Daniel, your comment on this hypocrisy.
As Mark already said, feminists are not for women. Feminists are simply a front group that attempts to recruit women into the political activism of the left, the same way that various Christian and Jewish left-wing organizations of the left that target Black people, Latinos, and so on and so forth. These are not organizations that are for those groups of people. They are for manipulating and influencing those groups of people to support the agenda of the left. It's the same old way that the communists during the Cold War would have front groups that would be artists against the war and poets against the war and mothers against the war. None of these groups had anything to do with promoting art or writing or poetry, or for that matter, even peace. They were just communist front groups. Everything the left does are front groups. So once upon a time, there were actual feminists. What we call feminists today are basically left-wing front groups, and they have nothing to do with women. I mean, this March, one of their campaigns was for legalizing prostitution. Other elements of the campaign really had very little to do with women. They're promoting Islamic theocracy, so you can't expect them to care about the Islamic abuse of women because the left has an alliance with Islam, just like the Hitler-Stalin Pact back in the day, and they're going to promote and protect that pact, the Red-Green Alliance, which some call it. And they will have very, very little interest in what's happening to women in the Muslim world, or for that matter, what's happening to women in the West, to European women, to American women who are being attacked by Muslim migrants. They have very little interest in what's happening to Muslim girls under FGM, because again, their only agenda is the agenda of the left. The left has no concern for human rights. It has no concern for human suffering. It has no concern for people in general, and that includes women, includes all the people that the left really claims to care about.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Just, we're running out of time, but, there's something else here. I mean, it's one thing after another. We are so used to there's not even a pretense of real reporting anymore. I was thinking while I was watching CNN, MSNBC during the Women's March, and I was just trying to picture them going, and now we're going to go to Daniel Greenfield in the crowd. And Daniel goes, good, yeah, nice to see you, Jim. Yeah, well, I'm down here. There's a lot of mental illness down here. And, a lot of depersonalization of political problems. Most of these people belong in an institution. You would just never see that, right? But you would think that balanced reporting might allow this, because when we were watching this on CNN, MSNBC, there's not even a pretense of reporting. They're just cheerleaders. Oh, I'm down here. Everybody's for equality. This is amazing. Oh my God, they're great. Oh, they're gonna, and it's sort of like parents cheerleading in the stands while their children are up on stage and they're clapping. That's what these reporters are doing. And, it was so creepy. I was watching Wolf Blitzer, and he's like, oh, Ashley Judd. Oh, we got a break now. Ashley Judd's on the thing. And then Brooke Baldwin is like, oh, Madonna's going to talk. Madonna's going to talk. What's going on here? They're not even pretending that they're journalists anymore. Mark?
Well, you nailed it exactly. they have dropped the pretense of journalism, the mainstream media. They're now openly activist, and they say things like, well, balance doesn't matter, objectivity doesn't matter, the truth matters. But of course, it's the truth according to the left, according to the left-leaning mainstream media. So you nail it exactly. They've dropped the pretense. They're now openly activist and unapologetic about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're balanced journalists, okay, have the radical, feminist reporter here and this other one here, but then have one reporter that makes a comment about maybe how there's not one word being said on behalf of, victims of honor killing in the Islamic world or something. Just not one word. Daniel, your thoughts on this, this cheerleading in the media now? It's just, like during the Women's March, it was pathetic the way Wolf Blitzer and Don Lemon and, Brooke Baldwin at one moment when Madonna was up there and she goes, the F word, F word, F word, F word, like 4 or 5 times. And then it comes up to Brooke Baldwin and she asks the woman next to her, what do you think? And the woman goes, very important and powerful. Daniel?
There's no more reporting because there's no more journalism. For that matter, most of the media has long since become irrelevant. If you're watching CNN, your flight has probably been delayed in an airport. Journalism does not exist. What does exist is a leftist propaganda complex that is dedicated to selling a very particular narrative. So the left, what we call the media, is not even in the bias. In the past, we used to say there was bias, so they would just kind of twist the reports one way, they would spin them. That's not what they're doing anymore. I mean, you can look at the media now, look at the barrage of just headlines that are selling pure narrative and recognize that. So what the media does is it pushes a single narrative. It's not even biased reporting. It's not really doing any reporting because if you want actual breaking news, you're going to go on social media. You're not going to turn on CNN. When you're turning on CNN, you want to be told a story, and the media is in the business of telling you a story. It's telling you a bedtime story. The story is Trump is evil, leftists are good. That's really the only story you're going to hear from them, just as in the past, the only story you heard from them was Obama is great, Republicans are evil. So now there are decent storytellers. They have various ways of telling the story, but they're not going to do anything except cheerlead for their own side and boo our side. That's pretty much all they're going to do. It's pretty much all they're capable of doing. It's all they're in the business of doing.
Before we go, if there was 60 seconds of wisdom that you could leave us with in terms of the rage of the Women's March, what would it be? Mark Tapson.
60 seconds of wisdom. Oof, no pressure there. Well, I think, Trump has brought out a lot of the irrational rage that is at the heart of leftism anyway. And this Women's March, as you can see, is part of it with women, full-grown women walking around dressed as giant vaginas and wearing pussy hats. It's just, it would be laughable if it weren't so culturally serious. And you just, Trump has brought this out in these women and in the left, and I think we're going to see more and more of it as they just explode in rage over him and his agenda, his big agenda, as David Horowitz would say. And I think that's going to hurt the left. I think it's going to empower ordinary Americans and independents to see how radicalized and enraged the left has become.
Thank you, Mark Tapson. And the final words of wisdom go to Daniel Greenfield.
I don't know if they're necessarily words of wisdom, but I think they're really pointing out the obvious. What happened to the left is that it became an echo chamber that left it unable, for example, to predict Trump's victory, but it also leaves it completely unable to assess crazy behavior by its own side. So it's unable to look at Ashley Judd's performance or some of the signs we were seeing and say, this is nuts. We should not be in the business of this. Because the left's whole principle was there are no enemies to the left, and they've become an echo chamber in which they're becoming crazier and crazier, but there's nobody outside it to tell them that they're crazy. So they don't listen to the right. They try to suppress the right where they can. People kind of in the middle have been silenced. They've been intimidated. They've been told that if they speak out, they can be fired, they can be persecuted, they can get into these social media lynch mobs. So a lot of these people have become independents. Even some Democrats are not comfortable with them, but they're keeping quiet. But this has left the left free to go completely berserk. That's what we saw with the so-called Women's March. We saw complete insanity. We saw the deranged signs, deranged rhetoric. A woman who had actually been in prison for torturing, kidnapping, and murdering a man, was one of the speakers. So the left has lost any conscience. It's lost any ability to tell good from evil, to tell when it's gone too far. And in a way, this is very helpful because the left is cracking up ahead of schedule.
And you know what? Thank God that there are some voices that exist that are calling them out on it. And those voices happen to be two Shillman Fellows. One is Mark Tapson at truthrevolt.org. The other one is Daniel Greenfield at The Point at Front Page Magazine. And you are shining a light into the leftist darkness. Mark and Daniel, thank you for everything that you do, and thanks for joining the Glazov Gang.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor.
Thank you. And thank you for joining the Glazov Gang. If you like what we do and you support us, go to jamieglazov.com and help us out because we're a fan-generated program, and you must absolutely be a YouTube subscriber of our YouTube channel. Good night.